Hello, I'm David R. Jones of the Community Service Society. Welcome to the Urban Agenda. Joining me today is a longtime advocate on behalf of poor and working poor families, the Borough President of Manhattan, C. Virginia Fields. Virginia?
Thank you. Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here with you. First of all, let me say Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Virginia.
Thank you.
Virginia and I, in sort of truth and advertising, have known each other for a long time. I won't mention how long, but going back to actually Community Board 10.
Yes, the early 80s when you were working with Mayor Koch.
That's right. The mayor recently came out with his State of the City address. It was filled with all sorts of things. We know you were listening very intently. What was your take on the mayor's 3 years and his report on it?
And actually, that's really how I looked at it, that this is a mayor who's been in office now 3 years. And I saw it more as a re-election speech as opposed to the state of the city. And I kind of expected that this being an election year. So I looked at it from the standpoint of the mayor has a vision for the city and moving forward very much in line with the kind of things that I have been talking about or doing. So I was glad to hear that. I was glad to hear the mayor talk about the fact that we need to do more to create jobs. And I know you know better than most with the report that came out from Community Service Society last year, talked about 1/2 of the men, African-American men in New York City being unemployed the previous year, and 1/3 of Latino men. Now, all of that year, nothing was done. Now, proposals for manufacturing jobs. You also talked about the need to bring back vocational training schools and the fact that monies have been taken out of those programs. Now they're coming back. So I'm delighted to see that his vision is very much consistent with my own. I was glad to hear him talk about domestic violence because we've certainly been working actively on that, as well as about a year or so ago, we called, 2 years now, called for at least Lower Manhattan to be seen as a public works project, where we use that rebuilding to put people in New York City back to work first. So from that standpoint, it was good. But I think that thinking about re-elections, that voters will look at, well, what has been done, not just the vision, because all of the candidates, whomever they are, in the election coming up, probably will have similar visions about where we should go, but people are going to be looking at the work.
Well, let's talk about education. Obviously, the mayor has sort of crafted part of his record around the question of reform of education. How successful do you think he's been in terms of public education and changing it?
I think that the mayor, unlike most of us who have been on this journey and engaged in some of this, perhaps expected some changes sooner than most of us believed that it was even possible. So having said that, the impact as far as grades and improved grades, et cetera, we would have to look at over a long period of time. But there's some other reforms that I think the opportunity existed. Increased parental involvement. That has not happened, David. We have developed a parent resource center in the Northern Manhattan office of the Manhattan Borough President's office. And we had to do it because so many parents had concerns and questions and issues that they simply were not able to negotiate through the Tweed building, at least when there were district offices, et cetera. And I'm not advocating for the old school board. I support reforms, trust me. I knew that we had to make some changes there. But there is no way locally that people feel connected. There is no opportunity to go to board meetings and raise issues that parents are most concerned about.
Now,
so
they set up some kind of parent coordinator thing. Wasn't that supposed to handle this?
It has not worked as effectively as I think it was believed to. For whatever reason, we of course, have met and will continue to meet with a number of parents. So the lack of parental involvement, which I think is crucial. Right. We have not moved in terms of smaller class sizes. We have not moved in terms of working out issues with the union so that teachers' salaries, and that's very much a part of the whole educational process too. We have not moved in terms of addressing, certainly in Manhattan, the capital needs of schools. I'm pleased that finally the mayor and the chancellor has agreed to build a school for Luparon students at Luparon High School. This is a high school in Washington Heights.
Yes.
And they're in a building that is totally inappropriate. No windows, no gymnasium. The cafeteria is so small they have to have a number of lunch breaks. The library is so small, the stairways are so small that it's almost a hazardous condition. When they released the capital plan, we fought to have that included. It was not. Only through continuous debates, discussions, and advocating, we've now got that school in. So whether it's that, whether it's special education, where for almost a year, students kind of got left behind because of bureaucratic mishandling, and now with parents and students considering about 86% of the high schools being unacceptable, I think that there's a whole lot there that could have been addressed sooner rather than even before we see some of the grades turning around, and that's extremely, extremely important, of course, the grades. So I think that a lot of it is due to the failure of the administration, quite frankly, to reach out, work with parents, work with educators, work with elected officials, work with other stakeholders in embracing the legislative reforms that were given to this mayor, and working together so that the kind of changes that were possible short-term and long-term could now be realized.
Well, let's take another thing that the mayor obviously points to as part of his, things he's brought about, which is this potential boom in new construction in the city of New York. Obviously, he's been pushing, and Deputy Mayor Doctoroff have been pushing new Olympics for the city of New York, new West Side Stadium. What is your position, for instance, on the West Side Stadium, which is everyone who reads the paper is hearing about?
And I have stated clearly that I fully support an expansion of the Javits Center. We need that, and that is directly tied into economic growth and development. I do not believe that the West Side is an appropriate venue for a stadium of any type, basketball or football in this particular instance. I think that it, even with the designs as we've seen them, it is overdevelopment of that area. I think that it is inconsistent with the neighborhood itself. My office hired a consultant about 3 years ago, and interesting enough, they came up with just about all of the plans for the West Side that the mayor wants to do in terms of the whole, rezoning, et cetera. Absent of that is a stadium. It calls for more commercial, the expansion of the Javits Center, retail, housing, affordable housing, and open space. We have an opportunity in this city to develop the West Side in a way that we can better meet the needs of people, which certainly speaks to affordable housing, as well as having a state-of-the-arts expansion of a Javits Center.
What do you think the critical stages are? I mean, all of us have been, it's like watching a ping pong match. What happens next in stadium development as to whether it gets approved or doesn't?
Well, now, based on how this whole process has been crafted, the specific site, the footprint for the stadium and the Javits Center was in fact put in the state legislature's jurisdiction. So the community boards, the borough president, the city council, we do not vote on that stadium. At the end of the day, and we're just about there now because the Empire State Development Corporation held hearings on it and they are approving it, it will now go to this public authority board where you have 3 members, the governor, Pataki, Speaker Sheldon Silva, and Majority Leader Bruno. They will decide, the 3 of them, stadium yes or stadium no. And it must be a unanimous vote between the three of them as to whether or not a stadium actually gets built.
So what do you think, Virginia?
Well, Speaker Silva has spoken out and said that he's troubled by some of the proposals as it relates to finance and what is going to happen with Lower Manhattan,
right,
and whether or not this proposal is going to impact the ability to keep Lower Manhattan intact, so that he was not saying if he was for it or against it. I don't know what is going to happen. I do know that Bruno and Pataki are 100% in support of this stadium. So I guess we'll have to see what the speaker decides.
And a final question on West Side. What do you think the Olympic, I think the Olympic bid is going to be decided within weeks or months, or when?
No, the Olympic bid will actually be decided in July of this year.
This year?
The July of this year.
Right before the election.
Right before the election. So a lot is riding on that.
Talk about an exciting, stay tuned as we go. We'll be right back to continue the urban agenda.
Once you see the world through math and science, you'll never see anything the same way again. Go to girlsgotech.org.
You'll see.
We're speaking today with the Borough President of Manhattan, C. Virginia Fields. Virginia, one of the other things that the mayor is talking about prospectively is his commitment to low and moderate income housing. From your vantage point as Manhattan Borough President, first of all, what is the condition for people who don't have a lot of money in terms of housing availability?
Very difficult to find affordable housing. I would say of all the requests that we have coming into our office, it is for assistance in finding affordable housing, rents that people can afford to pay. It is extremely difficult, and that's why my emphasis on the far west side of Manhattan and every other project, to the extent that we can, build in affordable housing so that working people can afford to either own or rent the housing. We are faced, in addition to little or no affordable housing coming online, Mitchell-Lama. You know, that was the the backbone for a lot of working people and middle-income people in this city. But little did they know that the legislation said after 25 years, the owner can buy out. And we have really been challenged by that here in Manhattan. And a number of developments have bought out. The good news is that we've been able to work with many of the owners so that the people who live there now continue to live pretty much at the rents that are in place. But once they leave, either move or otherwise, it goes up to market rate.
There was also a very negative legal decision saying that owners really don't have to negotiate anymore, which scared us. I know, you know, for a while, Mitchell-Lama was not on our radar screen until we did an analysis of what the income standards were in Mitchell-Lama's. And I didn't realize that, you know, nearly 50% of the people have incomes below $40,000.
Exactly.
A mark-to-market in that environment means your homeless numbers were this was just a foretaste of what could happen, particularly for people on fixed incomes. One of the things the mayor also mentioned was the homeless policy. I don't know if you've taken a position. Obviously, we've been concerned. Many of us in the advocacy world have been concerned about homeless policy. Basically not because we think that the administration is necessarily ill-intentioned, but they may underestimate the kind of systemic problem, basically a systemic problem of high rentals and limited income that people are facing that's driving homelessness.
And that policy, which we're still, of course, very much concerned about, is your right to not ask for Section 8 or other subsidies after you've been in the homes or in the housing for a certain period of time. What happens if after that time period you still do not have a job, or you might have lost your job again? what happens?
Well,
I mean,
this
those
goes
are
back to the
things.
very reports that we've been issuing.
Right.
Incredibly high unemployment rates for certain categories. 5 years may not be enough when you have nearly 250,000 black men out of work and 100,000 plus Latino guys out of work. And now we're about to issue a report looking at young people, where the numbers, particularly of Latinos, but also African American males, who are not either in work or in school, has just skyrocketed over the last couple of years, basically because changes in the economy and a total abdication by the education system. 5 years to turn around something that's so
It's amazing,
profound.
isn't it? You mentioned earlier about when we first started working together, it really was, as you will recall, around the whole housing
right.
issue, and that was so timely in terms of we had struggles with the community board, but we knew it was the right thing to do, and that began to bring online affordable housing for people at different income levels. And once that happened, we saw them, now they're working, they're paying taxes into the city, and it works. Housing, jobs, taxes, stability. And I think we have to look at this more comprehensively in moving forward in that same way. Who are we building housing for? I mean, everyone needs it, and the good news is that here in New York City, we do have the ability to sell apartments for $1 million, $5 million, $6 million. You read it in the papers every day. But what about those people, low income, middle income, working people who want to stay in this city? Most of us had an opportunity to come to this city, well, in my case, since I was not born here, but you were born here, right? Okay.
Brooklyn, not quite the city. I'm sorry.
You
Brooklyn.
are the city.
When we used to talk in Brooklyn about the city, we were talking about your borough. And going there was a big trauma.
New York City is made up of 5 boroughs. But most of us who came to New York City delighted in the fact that the opportunity existed for us to come, be able to, pay the rent and get a job and move up.
Right.
That is really questionable now for many young people, and I think we're a poor city because of that. We never should want to lose the ability to have people of all income mix and all racial, ethnic, different mixes in our city.
How would we suggest bringing those units online? I mean, that's perhaps the critical question. If there's disagreement with the mayor, where would the resources come for new housing units?
It is clear that it's going to have to be subsidized. I think we've talked about inclusionary housing.
Right.
That makes it possible for developers to get access, or rather subsidies and assistance beyond what they're able to get now from some of the assistance programs. But it's definitely going to have to be some assistance from government. We have run out of it's a good news, bad news scenario, in that we run out a lot of the public land that's available for building really huge, areas of housing, at least in Manhattan. But as I go throughout some of the other boroughs, we still have a fair amount of vacant land. So I think some form of subsidy is going to have to be made available from government.
But where would the revenue for that subsidy come from? Obviously, with constraints on taxes and the rest, how would we raise the money to do this?
Right, and I think that therein lies the issue of debate in terms of where the money will come from. What will have to be dropped off of the table in order to provide the dollars for that. And that's part, I think, of budgetary conversations that we can have and look within our existing resources. For example, I do know that the Battery Park city funds, they were specifically designated to help support subsidized housing. They are now a part of the general funds. They were only supposed to have been a part of the general funds when we had the crisis. And it is of interest, going back to the West Side Stadium, the recommendation earlier was to use the money from the Battery Park city fund to build the convention center or the sports center on the east side, so west side rather. If we can take the money to invest in a West Side Stadium or the expansion of the Javits Center, why can't we take that same money and use it for its intended purpose, which was for to build affordable housing.
Well, clearly that hasn't been on anyone's agenda, at least coming out. Tell me about the role. How has it been? There's been a major shift, obviously, since charter revision occurred in terms of the role of borough presidents. How has it been in terms of trying to represent the people of the borough with somewhat circumscribed powers now? How have you made that effective over the
It has been probably more difficult than it needed to have been because of the failure of mayors in during my tenure to work together. This is a position where I think it really works extremely well when mayors and borough presidents have a good working relationship, because borough presidents are very much connected to the needs of the borough in ways that, quite frankly, commissioners aren't. They have so many other things to do, and they're concerned with the entire city. So as we work on these issues we're talking about now, housing, education, senior issues, health care, jobs, etc., that, it works best. But despite that, we have been able to see some real gains. We have been able to move forward in creating affordable housing by working directly with developers as opposed to a mayor. Working to improve our schools by putting the resources in those schools through our capital budget. So I think it's what you make out of it. And we went to communities, areas of greatest need at the beginning, and we used the resources to address those needs, bringing Carver Bank at 117th Street and Lenox Avenue. It was an underserved area, as well as Roosevelt Island. So once you understand the needs of your borough and the communities and the people in these areas that are underserved, you can just use it. You're the chief executive, and you just do it.
Now, Virginia, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but your name has been mentioned prominently as a potential candidate for mayor. What's going to determine what your decision is on that?
Well, I have said it, and I am very serious and very interested in this. We are putting together a very strong team, pollsters, political strategists, media consultants, to look at it. We are engaged now actively in fundraising. So I will be making a decision within the next month or so about actually doing it. When we look at my background and my experience and this city and my vision for the city, it's a good time.
And you think Manhattan shouldn't be a problem?
Oh, no, I would never say that. I would never say that. I think every campaign stands on its own in terms of having to go out and make your case to the voters and see what they think. I think it's like President Clinton once said, we as public servants, it's like putting your resume for a job to the public, and they decide whether or not the resume is sufficient in terms of them hiring you. So that will have to happen in Manhattan. The good news is that I do have very good relationships in Manhattan. I've been elected twice as president of the Borough of Manhattan, twice as a council member in a district of Manhattan. So in terms of my deep roots and my support, it has certainly come from this great borough.
My thanks to Manhattan Borough President C. Virginia Fields for joining us today. I'm David R. Jones of the Community Service Society, and thank you for watching The Urban Agenda. To learn more about the work of the Community Service Society of New York or to comment on the Urban Agenda, please contact us at 212-614-5425 and on the web at www.cssny.org.